Right, I wanted to make a video to explain these different problems for the students who are not here in class when we go over the review. So let's jump straight in. Number one, it says if this is the graph of x squared minus 4x minus 5, then what are the solutions for a, b, c, and d, where it equals 0 or equals -8 or equals -11. Students struggle with this, but it's actually super easy. So when you are trying to find out when it equals 0, you're basically just saying, when is that curve going to be 0 high? And it's 0 high at -1 and at 5 for your x values. The next one says, when is it going to be -8 high? Well, you could have a horizontal line at -8, and it will intersect your curve at 1 and 3. So those are your solutions, 1 and 3. For the next one, when is it going to intersect the horizontal line at -11? It never does, so it'd be no real solutions. And then your last one, where does it intersect the line at -9, or intersect the curve, where the horizontal line at -9 intersects it will be at a x value of 2. So this is if you went over and solved any other way, completing the square, quad formula, or factoring, you would get those same exact solutions. Now, really though, when you guys are solving my graphing, I always recommend getting one side to equal 0, then you could say the x-intercepts are your solutions. Now let's keep moving on. Number 2 says match the correct graph using hints from your equation. So that first one is in vertex form, I is in vertex form, and it tells you the vertex is at 1, -4. The only parabola that has a vertex of a 1, -4 is B, so it's got to be B. The next one, when I'm looking at this, if I actually do the b squared minus 4ac, I find out you're going to have a negative under the square root when you do the quadratic formula, which means no solutions, which tells you that your parabola can have no x-intercepts, and that's going to be D. The next one, you can see that your x-intercepts are going to be at -3 and +1. Be careful, it's not +3 and -1. It's going to be at -3 and +1, and that is going to be A. And then the last one, you can see there's only going to be one x-intercept, and it's going to be at a +3. This thing will only have one solution, and it is going to be a +3. So that one would be C. The next one says Kendall tries to solve the following quadratic. Somehow she brings it down to it either being an answer of 3 or -3, and she doesn't know which one it's going to be. So how can she check that? Do not forget, when we solve, you can always substitute in the value that you think is the solution and see if it makes the equation true. And in this case, only 3 makes it true. So -3, when you substitute -3, it does not make the equation true, so only 3 is the solution. All right, the next one's one of my biggest concerns is that students are going to go into this test and not know how to factor. And if you can't factor, then you're going to miss all the problems on factoring, and you're going to miss all the problems on solving by factoring as well. I'm also concerned students are going to try to solve by factoring when it is not even an equation. So number 4 just says factor. There is no equal sign. You cannot solve by factoring. For A, you should have picked up on the fact this is a difference of squares. You have a perfect square minus a perfect square. And we learned that you can just square root both of them. So it's going to be 6x and 6x, plus and minus, and 7 and -7. And you don't ever have to just guess that that's the right answer. You could always FOIL and see if you get back to the original. The next one, you're going to have to do your ACB chart, getting a 4 and a -1. When you do this, you end up getting x plus 4 and x minus 1. And once again, you can just go ahead and FOIL this and see if you get back to your original. Now the last one is a little bit trickier. If you do the PANTS method, as I had called it, or factoring by grouping, you have to do the longer method. You cannot do a shortcut on this one because there's a number in front of the x squared. You get your winning pair. I'm starting to get used to the box method, so I've been doing that more often. And you end up getting x minus 4 and 3x plus 2. You are not solving this because it is not an equation, so you can't solve it. Those are your answers. Those are the two things that would multiply together to get 3x squared minus 10x minus 8. Now the next ones actually say solve by factoring, because you actually have to solve by factoring. This does not mean just factor. Once you get something times something equals 0, you have to set each one of them equal to 0 and solve. So when you factor this one, you get 2x minus 3 and 2x minus 3. Something times something equals 0. Either the first one or the second or both equal 0. And when you solve, you end up getting positive 3 halves. That is the only number that you'd be able to substitute in. That would make that equation true. And you could always put 3 halves, enter into your graphing calculator, store it as x, and then put 4x squared minus 12x plus 9, and it will give you a 0 because that is the correct answer. On the next one, you need to remember to get one side equal to 0. Once you get that, you do your ACB chart factor and set each factor equal to 0. -5 and +2 are going to be your solutions. And you could always substitute in -5 and 2, and you would see that it would make the equation true. You put -5 squared in parentheses, the -5 squared plus 3 times -5, enter, you will get 10. The next one, when you factor this one, you'll have something times something equal to 0. When you set each something equal to 0 and solve, you get -1/3 and you get +5. Those are the two values that will make the equation true. And if you solve by graphing, those would be your x-intercepts. Now, probably the hardest thing that we did was completing the square. Remember, when you complete the square, you need to get rid of the number that doesn't complete the square. Make sure there's no number in front of the x squared, and then do your half of b squaring method. So on here, half of b is 3, and 3 squared is 9. The magic number is 9. 7 is not the magic number, so I subtract it away, and I add 9 to both sides. At this point, you know that the left side factors into the x, and then whatever you had before you squared it, so an x and a 3, and then you did have to add whatever it was after you squared it, the 9, to the other side. You get your answer of -3 plus or minus the square root of 2. Those are the exact answers. You could put in your calculator to get the approximates. You could also solve this by graphing and make sure that your x-intercepts are equivalent decimals to -3 plus or minus square root of 2. The next one, before you can do anything, you're going to want to divide by 2, or you could have added 20 to both sides, then divided by 2. In this case, now you're going to do half of your b, which is -1.5, and square it. That is -0.75 squared, which is 0.5625. The number that we have over there currently is not 0.5625, so we want to get rid of it. That's how I add the 10 to both sides. I add 0.5625 to both sides, but we know the trick. When you factor it, it's going to be an x, and then whatever it was, the b divided by 2 before you squared it, which is -0.75. When you do this process, even though that number does not look like it's going to square root nicely, it does. It's 3.25. And you end up getting 4 and -2.5. If you solve by graphing, those would be the x-intercepts. If you solved by quad formula, those would be the answers as well. Now these ones are solving by square rooting. The main thing is get the x squared or whatever is in parentheses squared by itself, square root, and don't forget your plus or minus. A is going to have two answers that are opposites, because your parabola has not been shifted left or right, so it's going to have opposite answers, symmetric about the y-axis. B, on the other hand, is going to have numbers that are not going to be opposites, because it will be shifted left or right, and you get 8 and 0. Next one, you're going to do the quad formula. When you do the quad formula, one side has to equal 0. Once you have one side equal to 0, you pick your A, B, and C, you sub it in, and you're very careful not to mess anything up. Biggest things people mess up is, let's say you had -8 squared, your calculator is going to tell you it's -64 instead of +64. We got to the point where it was 8 plus or minus the square root of 52 over 2. Technically, you could simplify the rad 52 to be 2 rad 13. You can see my method with the little t-table above. Then technically 8 is divisible by 2, and so is 2. 2 is divisible by 2, so I could get all the way down to 4 plus or minus rad 13. The next one, when you do the quad formula, one side equal to 0, pick your A, B, and C, sub it in, and you end up getting a 2 and -1/3. Don't forget, if you get a negative under the radical, it's no solution. If you get a 0 under the radical, it's going to be one solution, because you're going to add and subtract 0, and either way, you get the same number. And if you have a positive number, it will be 2 solutions. On number 9 here, it says give an example of equations with the following characteristics that have no solutions. So if you want to have no b term and no solution, just make sure the person ends up square rooting a negative, like that. If you want there to be a b term, just make sure that when they did the quad formula, you would get a negative underneath the radical. And in this case, 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 7 gets you a negative. So that would be no real solutions. And the next one would be no x-intercepts, so no solutions. Okay, number 10, it says an object is shot up in the air. It gives you the equation that represents this. It says when will it hit the ground? Do not graph. You could always graph to check your answer, but I wanted you to do it by calculations. Since our answers are going to be ugly, we are going to use the quad formula. You pick your A, B, and C. A is -16, B is 80, and C is 10. Pop it into the quad formula. simplify it down, you get one negative answer, which makes no sense, and you get one positive answer, which does make sense, 5.1 seconds. The next one says, how high will it be after 2.8 seconds? All you have to do is substitute in 2.8. You find out that it is 108.56 feet high. And then it says, will this be on the way up or down? Well, the way you figure that out is find out where the highest point is using axis of symmetry formula, which is 2.5 seconds. So is it before 2.5 seconds or after 2.5 seconds? 2.8 is after, so it's on its way down. Number 11 says, how would you solve the following if you wanted to get exact answers? Justify your answer. You do not have to solve. So the first one, that A, B, and C are really ugly. I'm pretty sure it's not going to factor nicely. I can't square root because there's a B term. I would probably say quad formula. Quad formula, or you could go over and do completing the square. Either one, because the answers are probably going to be ugly. The next one, I would definitely square root because you have something squared. It's in vertex form. So you're going to be able to add the 2 to both sides and then square root, not forgetting your plus and minus. And then lastly, when I look at this, if I try to do my ACB chart, it does work. So since there are two numbers that multiply to get 24 and add to get 11, I know it can be factored. So me personally, I'd solve by factoring. Quad formula would work. Completing the square would work. Graphing technically would work because since we know the answers are probably going to be nice, you're going to be able to see them easily on a graph. And but I'd probably solve by factoring. Just know that on the test, I'm going to force you to do it in certain ways. You cannot just do the quad formula for every single problem. If you were in class today, I showed you how to solve by graphing on your graphing calculator. You are more than welcome to check all your answers with the graphing calculator, like just solving by graphing, but you do need to know how to do all these methods. All right, thanks for watching.